Masters, wardens, speakers, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. My name is Mark Holford. I am the master of the Information Technologists livery company, at least for the next 3 weeks, at which point I retire. This is the Tri-Livery Event, which is hosted by ourselves, the stationers and the Marketors. It's over the last 4 years gained considerable traction and prestige, and it's become a flagship event for all three of us. I know that some of the audience perhaps don't quite know what a livery company is, so I will attempt in a very short time to give you a thumbnail sketch. The oldest livery company dates back, I think, to the weavers, to the 12th century. They were originally the guilds in the city of London, and there are some outside London. We have really four or five pillars, the first of which is fellowship, and that's getting together, maybe over dinner, and getting to know each other so that we can deliver all the other good things that we do through friendship. The second one is education. Almost every livery company has a relationship with schools. In my company's case, with the Hammersmith Academy, which we co-founded with the Mercers and with the Lillian Baylis Technology School in Vauxhall. We, of course, support our industry, which is the third pillar, and I think our industries are fairly obvious from our titles. All livery companies are involved in charitable activities, both in giving money and in volunteering. I think I'm right in saying that in 2020, the livery companies collectively gave away over £72.5 million, making them one of the top 5 donors in the UK. And finally, I'm not sure it's necessarily a pillar, but almost all livery companies have a relationship with the armed forces. In our case, it's HMS Collingwood, the largest defence training establishment in Europe, and the Royal Signal Corps. On that note, I will now just introduce my two fellow masters. I was about to say sitting next to me. Unfortunately, it's a virtual sitting next to me. So Trevor Brignall is standing in for John Farrell, who at the last minute who's the master of the Marketors. John is the senior warden, and has very kindly agreed at very short notice to stand in. I think I'm right in saying, Trevor, you have significant experience of professional services firms, and you worked in the banking, corporate M&A, government, local authority, healthcare, insurance, all sorts of sectors.
Indeed, I think often called a jack of all trades, so I'm delighted.
Well, there we are. I'm afraid to say I had rather a short time to do any research. Robert Flather, who is the master of the stationers, he's been in post since July. You have a long-term career, I think I'm saying, with Colbus, a leading manufacturer of packaging machinery, and you've also held leading positions in various trade bodies. So I'm going to hand over now to Robert, who's going to introduce us to the subject tonight, leading business through the new normal. And that leads me to hope that next year, the new normal for this event will be in person in one of the halls in the city. On that note, Robert, over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Master Information Technologist. I join Mark in welcoming you all to this topical Tri-Livery webinar. We've all been through an unprecedented period of change with our inability to travel and meet. Organisations and businesses have had to adapt quickly to embrace this new normal so that commercial life can continue. Tonight's discussion will, I hope, inform us of others' experiences. Within stationers, we have used Zoom and video conferencing as an opportunity to ensure we can connect with as many members as possible. Holding events such as this are in themselves such an opportunity. We've seen more of our more elderly colleagues who find travel physically difficult during recent months. We've also been able to embrace our international members who have joined in events they would normally not be able to attend. The theme from my year in office is more than just London, and online events are helping deliver this. Balancing this, because it's not all one way, balancing these advantages is, of course, the downside that you cannot beat the fellowship gained from being with like-minded souls and under one roof. However, we can safely say that a new format of events has definitely been born. In stationers, we've also taken the opportunity to press ahead with the refurbishment of Stationers Hall, The break in live events has given us a window to get the work done. The £8.5 million project will transform our hall and deliver accessible, flexible spaces for members and commercial events, with additional new dedicated conference suites. Work is well underway with completion during Q2 next year, so it doesn't look like this at the moment, but it's going to be ready, hopefully, for the Tri-Livery event next year. In my business life, we've also had to adapt to the new normal. As has just been explained, I work for an engineering company which designs and builds machinery for the packaging industry. We have design teams in both the UK and 2 sites in Germany. Without travel, we've had to embrace the new technology to enable coordination across all these sites. The bigger challenge has been in selling equipment. Capital equipment historically has relied on demonstrations and factory visits to facilitate the sale. We have had to stream live demonstrations from our factory floor in an interactive manner so that the remote customer can test the machine as if he was in the room with the machine. This has posed many challenges, but it has worked and all our sites currently have full order books. Unbelievably, the first order we took after the lockdown started was from a company in Mexico with the most appropriate name, Graficas Corona. It also leads us to question whether the staple of selling capital equipment, the trade show, which has been very important in the past, will still have a role in the future. Maybe that's a topic for another event. 18 months on from the start of restrictions, we are all still learning. So I'm very much looking forward to hearing the views of our panelists tonight. So over to you, Jenny. Thank you.
Good evening, and many thanks to the Master Information Technologist and the Master Stationer for these opening remarks. And I'd like to add my own very warm welcome to all of the members of the 3 livery companies and all of our very welcome guests. My name is Jenny Ashmore. I'm from the Marketors, and I am your panel chair this evening. My goal is to make sure that you walk away with your interest piqued in some way, maybe 1 or 2 thoughts challenged, and some new opportunities that you can take forward in your own life and those of the organisations that you work with. We have a wonderful panel for you this evening. The Tri-Livery Group has brought them together for their deep experience and insight into the worlds of the City of London, into entrepreneurship and into commerce. I will introduce them each in turn, but to whet your appetites, we have Shivan Joshi Mbe with his deep involvement in the City of London. We hope to have Natalie Sini, CBE, and her leading role in fintech and payments, although she's currently battling her way around the M25 after the closure of the Dartford Tunnel, so we will see how that progresses. Trevor Fennick, Executive Chairman and co-founder of Euromonitor International, with global perspectives on many key issues, especially on innovation and culture. And Tom Ilubi, CBE, who's a tech entrepreneur and an educational philanthropist. And I'm Jenny Ashmore. I'm a portfolio non-executive across a number of different sectors and business life stages, and I'm a former president of the Chartered Institute of Marketing. The structure of the evening is that each of the panel will talk for around 6 minutes on their own perspectives at this very, very interesting time. And then we'll segue into a panel discussion. In terms of housekeeping, the Zoom technology will mean that you'll only be able to see and hear the speakers, and you'll be on mute and not on the main screen. The meeting will be recorded, as you will have gathered from the messages that you saw. However, please do type your questions into the Q&A box that you access at the bottom of the screen, and do it at any time. I'll be looking to take as many questions as I can, with the goal of finishing on time at 7:15, as I know many of you have other commitments this evening. But I do encourage you, do get those questions in early. So as the flyer said, it's probably a century since we've seen external events have such widespread impact on every single consumer, every business, and every organisation. In some sectors, people have argued that whilst perhaps the trends already existed, the pace has accelerated dramatically, such that we've seen at times the magnitude of a year of change in each month during the pandemic. So what can you do to harness this change and leap forward into the next opportunities? The title for this evening has used the polarizing phrase of the new normal, and I've encouraged the panelists to debate substance rather than phrases and slogans. One of the things that really interests me at times of change and whenever there's a major event is that accounts in the immediate aftermath show a whole variety of different recollections and narratives and interpretations. And it's only over time with the rationalizing effect of repetition that there's a concentration into one or two key narrative lines. So given that we're still in the thick of this pandemic, albeit hopefully now at the beginning of the end, I'm interested in a few different narratives. We've seen the widening of gaps in many areas, a retrenchment in global politics, more physical challenges to business than ever before, and of course, a step change usage of digital in every channel and every part of the value chain. So I've been interested in the sociologist's view of the implications of the haves and the have-nots across geographies and age groups, and what that means in terms of resource pressure points, migration, and conflict. I've also been very interested in the economist's view. Is protectionism now overtaking open marketplaces? And what are the wider economic implications of this? This could change the technology platforms that we use, as well as the freedom of capital, of goods, of people, and can have major implications on supply chains, real estate, and business services. Many people on the call will be very expert on the technologist's view. Will we see artificial intelligence and machine learning not only address the productivity challenges, but actually get to better decisions with better accuracy and better outcomes than humans? And is this part of the change point? And then the psychologist's view of how individuals and groups and institutions respond at these moments of disruption. They have deep impacts on the untalked about areas such as trust and connections and rule following, expectations, aspirations. So many are discussing right now what this means for our workplaces, but over time, I think we also have to accept that this will shape our legislation and regulation, our politics, our policing and justice systems, and our public services. So what do all those lenses, and indeed many more, mean for you and your organisation? I was reminded of Stephen Covey's book called The Speed of Trust, and he talks about trust being the very glue of life, and that even the construct of society itself is built on that perhaps most difficult to measure attribute of trust. So which of the lenses should we be using as business leaders? Or is the art as business leaders having the kaleidoscope and gently turning those lenses, exploring narratives and options, and actually creating different and innovative futures? Predicting the future is notoriously difficult to do. We know that from Michael Fish, from Nostradamus, and pretty much all recent election pollsters. But that's what we've asked our panelists to have a little crack at, and perhaps talk about the how of navigating this as well as the what. So with this in mind, let me hand over to our first panelist. I'm delighted to introduce Shivan Joshi Mbe. He's an elected member of the Court of the Common Council, which is the City of London's primary decision-making body. He's also Deputy Chairman of the Property Investment Board, Streets and Walkways Subcommittee, and also the Corporate Asset Subcommittee, and sits on the corporation's main policy and resources board. He's especially engaged in the city's climate action plan and transport strategies. So we're very much looking forward to hearing his insights. Over to you, Shivan.
Thank you very much for that introduction and for having me on this Tri-Livery panel. And it's wonderful to be here, it really is. Especially thanks to Anne Sunners, who had invited me to participate in this group. I've got to say, when it comes to selecting topics, I don't think you could have chosen anything more pertinent than how we lead business through the new normal. However, I want to try and rephrase the approach to this. I'd like to break the subject down a bit, as I think there are a number of misconceptions around what 2021 and beyond really look like. First of all, do businesses want to be led into anything? I think, you know, for me as a free market economist, as a capitalist at heart, I'd say that businesses should lead where they want to go, and a new equilibrium would then establish itself from that, rather than being led anywhere by anyone who thinks they know better. Honestly, we've all spent the last few years being told how to behave and what to do, and the whole concept of personal responsibility, to my mind, has been thrown out with the bathwater. To me, businesses will establish new modes of working, new opportunities will arise and refocus their energies to gain the maximum productivity and the profitability that they should go for, from the situations we find ourselves in now. The workplace operations and execution of that are what we ought to focus on here, which I think is ripe for change. And that, as you said before, the trends were already emerging for that kind of change before. Secondly, what we call the new normal and how that's defined is a very, very subjective piece. There's no grand new normal that is signed up to by society as a whole, or even governments around the world. We're seeing now the disparities in approach by governments like New Zealand compared to the US or much of the rest of the world, which has returned most civil liberties to people. So what one person's new normal means is going to be very different to another's. Even talking to people in the same office, I get very different answers to what it means for them. A lot of this has to do with corporate structure and roles within companies. So let's look at the new normal in terms of those roles and structures. There is a huge risk of leaving certain groups of people behind in this. We want to be a more equitable society. We always talk about it. Everyone wants to focus on EDI within their corporate structures. And it's important that we can carry those most vulnerable groups along with us as we try to change some of our behaviors. One of the first groups of people I've seen returning to the square mile are those at the front line of businesses, the salespeople, the traders, the innovators, the creators, people who thrive and demand human interaction for their wealth generation. So the new normal for them probably looks quite like the old normal as they grow their businesses and compete to increase market share or indeed forge new markets and opportunities. Of course, technology can help with this a lot, especially when we look at the cost or the carbon footprint of flying to a destination to meet a prospective client, as opposed to doing it by Zoom. But to me, these are quite untested tools for creating new innovations, building relationships and developing longer term success. We've adopted them because that's what was available in March 2020. So let's see how tech evolves in the coming years and what tools we do end up incorporating into our new behaviors. The most at-risk category of employees, probably the operations and support teams, which don't necessarily have to be in the same location as their client-facing colleagues. The question in my mind is, does it then matter if that team is in the UK or abroad in a market like South Africa, India, or beyond, where labor costs are far lower and there's no material impact to the company's client-facing performance? These are the questions that I think companies are going to have to battle with, and that's where I think the battlefronts of the new normal are going to be fought out. Businesses have struggled during lockdown. Retail, hospitality, and those reliant on passing trade have been decimated by wave after wave of lockdowns. At the City Corporation, we've committed to a £50 million grant scheme to help them back onto their feet as we emerged out of the last round of lockdowns. We've also given rate relief to certain classes of SMEs. From the city's perspective, we're planning to be as accommodating as we can be to encourage the workplace to thrive. We've offered pavement licenses to venues at no cost so that they can attract as much customers as possible, despite the muted summer this year. We've changed the streetscape so that pavements are wider, cycle lanes are safer, and the urban environment encourages active transport. I was actually on a call just last week with TfL, and the Bishopsgate Road is now the second busiest cycled route in the entire country. And that's amazing when you think 2 years ago, most people would not want to be cycling down that road. We're also a very substantial landlord in the city and the West End. We've taken the decision to offer rent adjustments, move tenants onto turnover rents or even monthly rent payments, which all help ease cash flow, enable those businesses to survive in the longer term. This city's been built on Roman forums, Elizabethan coffee shops, Victorian exchanges, and perhaps the modern equivalent is the business lunch, I don't know. But the need for human interaction to congregate, to exchange ideas and to create is something that I think is vital for us to remain a global centre of excellence. We may well see different types of companies locating to the square mile, wanting flexible arrangements for workplace, detachment from the traditional working week. But the bounce back we've seen in hospitality in the city in the past few months is testament to our confidence that people will polarize back to our city centres. Thank you, Jenny.
Thank you, Shivan. And I'm sure that Streetscape, if nothing else, will already start some questions flooding into the Q&A box. My own experiences, that can be very polarizing. But thank you very much for sharing that. So I'm now going to move on to Trevor Fennick, past master of the Stationers Company, who's executive chairman and co-founder of Euromonitor International, which is the global market data and analytics company. It's headquartered in Clerkenwell and has 1,500 employees working from 15 offices all around the world. Over to you, Trevor.
There we go. Thanks, Jenny, and thanks, Shivan, for that introduction to what the city has been doing and will be doing. I've been at Euromonitor 45 years. I've witnessed, lived, survived, and possibly thrived through many extraordinary disruptive events. The recession of the 80s and the 90s, the stock market crashes in 87, the financial crisis in 2008. They've all been pretty good for business, actually. Disruption is good for an information business. Uncertainty drives the need for analytics and information. So my starting point was here is, would it be different this time? Certainly, the sheer scale and enormity of the events of the last 18 months, COVID coinciding with Brexit, the background challenges of digital, have all meant disruption on a scale not seen in most of our business lifetimes. I'm a stationer. I think of myself as a publisher. My company collects analysis and creates data for international businesses and governments. We help them make decisions. We have, I think, a good insight into consumer trends and international cultural differences and the way companies work and interact with different things. The fact that I've got 15 offices around the world, each one of them, even now, I think 3 of them are still shut, and those may have been the ones that opened first. Korea has been going up and down like a yo-yo. Even Shanghai, I think, has gone backwards a bit. Chicago, which I would expect to be the most gung-ho of all of our offices, part of the Midwestern can-do, mentality. They take the East Coast on and fight hard for business. They are not going back to work. It's a real challenge there. So all of these things are impacting on the business. The history, in the 70s and the 80s, we created content by telex and fax. Personal computers, we were really early adopters of this, and I actually think I can say that I was born digital in this respect, with a PET Commodore and various things called WordStar, which was, for those of you with long memories, a precursor of Microsoft, and even something called Lotus 123, which enabled us to connect and analyze data. Our digital content and the advent of the internet and then the web enabled us to move, not without some pain, to digital content, initially offline, then online. We intermediated with online, digital and data hosts, and then we disintermediated them as the web and the internet came along, which enabled us, through our network of offices, to build direct relationships. And I recognize Shivan saying that the early returners at Euromonitor in Clerkenwell were the commercial and the salespeople. The content producers and the tech producers, so the people who actually organize the content, their work patterns are suited, and perhaps their personalities and culture and their temperaments are suited to working in a more remote environment. But the people who have come back, and I'm going to say a bit more about this cultural thing later, the culture of the workplace, have been the people who say it's a differentiator for them. They need to be back and working with people. They thrive on it. Digital disruption created the Euromonitor of today. Sadly, other sectors of the publishing and content sector either did not or could not take the same digital opportunity. Some newspapers, and certainly the music and the entertainment industry, did not anticipate the impact of the newcomers, the new digital entrants, monetizing their content. Fortunately, we sidestepped that by building our own relationships with our clients. And that possibly leads into what has been going on. What was different last year? Well, I've got a question, rhetorical. Where did the clients go? Something was different April last year, as most businesses simply stopped and went virtual. New business simply dried up as large corporates re-geared to virtual offices and remote working. The sheer uncertainty of that crisis meant companies simply did not or could not make purchasing decisions. Teams had gone virtual, and the enormity of the scale of things meant basically people sat on their hands, either because they didn't know how to make corporate decisions, or it was such a massive shock to the system that cash was king and people just stopped doing things. It was as simple as that. It took, in our case, about 3 to 4 months for the clients to reboot and start making decisions. As I said, in previous crises, information had been a commodity for companies trying to work out what was going on. This was such a shock to the system that I think people just decided to, hibernate and see what happened. As business did return to the then normal, as I call it, sectors that did well in our sector were financial, credit, risk assessment, defensive data, rather than future-looking, outward expansion content, the sort of thing that our company produces to help people make forward-looking decisions. Where did those employees go? In the clients, it depended upon their how should I put it, the distribution of people through the offices and the offices themselves. At Euromonitor, we were extremely lucky. We were lucky because we'd been unlucky the year before. We'd had a massive malware attack, as a result of which we'd had to completely reboot our technology and actually had something that was totally fit for purpose. It had to be fit for purpose, working with 15 offices, but now it was robust and people could go and basically work. Essentially, we had no disruption to our systems at all. The virtual working was almost instantaneous. Looking forward a bit, what will change? And now this is where I'm going to sort of echo some of Jenny's comments. Few people remember forecasts. Trust me, I should know. I'm a market forecaster. However, a few personal observations. Like most businesses, we're having to encourage people back to work. I've already said that the early adopters, the early returners are the outward going, I was going to say the alpha types, but the sort of people who need human interaction. Different demographics have been presenting different challenges. Senior employees, some people who I call my longest serving colleagues, have been perhaps the most difficult to get back. They had a good lockdown. They had the houses in the country or in the leafy suburbs. They didn't live in the inner suburbs. They still are struggling. Younger colleagues who are challenged by commuting costs, some who can't afford to live in there, are the people who really want to get back. And those younger people, often living alone, have possibly had some of the greatest need to get back to the society. And to do this, we're doing the normal things. We have drinks on the roof. We have neck massages for those suffering stress from too much keyboarding. Sometimes I think we're a wellness center rather than a data publisher, but hey, trust me, I'm a researcher. What I do know is that hybrid working will be normal. We have about 30,000 square feet in the near city. One of our leases is coming to an end. We own our other building. The lease will go, and we will probably go down to about 50% capacity rotating. that is not necessarily a bad thing. Different offices in the world will be different things. We expect, for instance, our Japanese office to be fully populated as soon as they can, but that they have different challenges there. Looking into my history, the first overseas office I opened in '93 was in Chicago. Chicago's had to reinvent itself over the years. When I first was there, the downtown area, the Loop, was the financial district. There was a few old-fashioned retail stores. Marshall Fields was down there, and they had to change. They relocated north of the river to the Golden Mile, and there was not a lot going on in the Loop after 5 or 6 o'clock in the evening. There were a few late night bars for the traders working with the Far East. Over the last 30 years, that has completely changed. The Loop is now a vibrant centre. They've got fantastic art institutes. They've got Amish Kapoor statues. They've got a Lurie garden designed by Pete Udoff. They draw people in, and I know this is what the city, our City of London, is beginning to work on. It deals with residential, it has retail, it has culture, it has tourists and a commercial centre. And the 24-hour city, I think, we're starting to see that. If you walk down, I mean, Shivan mentioned Bishopsgate, you cycle down to that. There are new places to visit there. The Culture Mile, linking the Tate with the Barbican and further. The development of West Smithfield are doing the right things. And our younger employees certainly will respond to that.
That's lovely, Trevor. Thank you. I'm going to wrap you up there, if that's all right, just because we're going to come back to both those themes because they're so beautifully made. The piece of the return to the office, which already we've got some questions coming into the Q&A on, and the link to what that means for cities, which Shivan's also set up. But I'm going to move on, if that's all right, in order to keep the debate moving, and introduce our final speaker, who's Tom Ilube, CBE Liveryman of the Information Technologists. He's CEO of Crossword Cybersecurity PLC and also chair of the Rugby Football Union. He's an educational philanthropist and founded as a founding chair of the Hammersmith Academy, which is the technology school, as you heard from the master at the start, established by the Information Technologists and the Mercers, and has also founded the African Science Academy, which is an all-girls STEM school in Ghana. So Tom, we're really interested to see how you have probably an additional take on some of the themes that have already come up and perhaps some new ones. Over to you.
Thank you very much. So as I was thinking about this question of leading through the new normal, I was thinking about the technology and I've been thinking about the business models. But what has struck me as someone who is day-to-day leading a technology company, an entrepreneurial, fast-growing, AIM-listed technology company, Crossword Cybersecurity, what am I actually spending a lot of my time on? And what I'm spending my time on is culture. What I've realized as a leader is that new business models, new ways of working, new technology will not work without a culture that is fit for the new normal that we're moving into. That then raises the question in my mind and amongst my colleagues about what are the characteristics of a culture that is fit for the new normal. And I believe there are 4 characteristics that are important and that are different if you push them to sort of an extreme where you need to push them for this environment. The first is a focus on responsibility. The culture has to really embrace the idea that the people that work in the company are, to a much greater extent than may have been in the past, responsible for what they do and what they produce, rather than being managed through their work process. And that can be uncomfortable for managers sometimes. The second is openness. You have to, if you have people in hybrid work environments, sometimes in the office, sometimes out of the office and so forth, the organizational culture becomes a lot more open and there's much more of an emphasis on communication and really open and authentic communication and listening. The third is flexibility and recognizing that the challenge as a leader is to genuinely make your organization flexible. For example, and it's a fairly trivial thing, but it matters to us, we have added onto all of our emails at the bottom, we say, it suits me to email you at this time because these are the hours I work. I do not expect an answer from you until it suits you to reply. And we adhere to that, and we really mean it. And that's sort of top to bottom in order to really get it into our team's minds that this sort of flexibility isn't just an add-on or a word that we use, it is actually fundamental to what we expect. And the fourth is learning. Much more than ever before, we have to become a learning organization and understand that everyone is going to be learning all the time. Interestingly, if you look back in time in the technology industry, there was a company founded in the 60s and quite well known in the 70s and 80s until it was acquired, called F International, that then became Xansa, was set up by Dame Stephanie Shirley, sometimes known as Steve Shirley, which actually embraced all of these sorts of principles way back then. So we're not really inventing anything new here, and there are great examples going back of how people have worked in these distributed environments that we ought to draw more upon. A few years ago, my son was doing was having his gap year, and he got a job with a company, quite a new and rapidly growing company. And on the first day, he went in at 8:30 to make sure he was there for 9 o'clock. And on the second day, he was still in bed at 10 o'clock. And I thought, what's going on? Have you been fired already? Or and he said, oh, no, I went in the first day, but they told me I can come in whenever I like. So I won't really start working till around lunchtime. Oh, and by the way, they said, I can go to whatever meetings I like. I only have to go to meetings that I believe will directly ensure that I deliver my job, and I can take as much or as little holiday as I like. There's no set amount of holiday. I just need to be able to do the work that I'm given. And I said, that's impossible. There is no way that, show me your employment contract. And he showed me his employment contract, and sure enough, that is exactly what it said. And it was embracing a set of principles that are called results-only work environments, ROWE. And there are a number of companies that have embraced this way of working, and in some cases it's worked, in some cases it hasn't worked. But just the idea of it is really, really interesting, and it's worth having a look at to think, is that the sort of culture that we need for the new normal? We have to remember, though, that culture change is hard, and it isn't just a case of saying, right, here's our new culture for the new normal, here are the policies, go and live that new culture. It doesn't work like that. It is hard work to change a culture. And in some ways, the more successful a company has been with its existing culture, the more difficult it can be to evolve it to a new culture. Managers find it difficult to give up control. Staff even find it difficult to embrace the responsibility and flexibility. They like the tram lines that they've been given. And so if you're going to shift the culture, you have to recognize that it's hard. So to conclude, I think to lead a business through the new normal, it's important to understand that technology, process, policies, business models are incredibly important, but in my mind, they are secondary to the primary focus of getting our culture right for the new normal. And that means embracing things like responsibility, openness, flexibility, and learning, working hard to make that culture change happen, and then building the new business on top of this new culture. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tom. And I think you did a lovely job there of drawing together the threads that we'd already discussed. And I think it leads into the first question that I'm going to ask, and then we'll come on to the one that's in the Q&A. And I encourage everybody on the call to keep chipping in those questions, and we'll cover them. But it strikes me when I listen to everybody, the number of times that culture and responsibility has come up is very striking. And you touched there on that idea of actually cultural change is hard. And it made me wonder whether, to Trevor's point, it's an opportunity for new entrants more, and a challenge for incumbents, or whether that's not true and anybody can go after it. So I'm interested to hear the panel's view on, is this an environment where we can expect to see a massive flood of entrepreneurial activity, or do you think it's going to be more existing businesses reorienting and pivoting? Who'd like to take that? Go on, Trevor. You've seen it across a number of businesses in a number of different countries. What's your sense? Oh, you're on mute, actually. Yeah.
I was thinking about what Tom was saying, and just I don't know enough about his business to know whether it's, but my immediate thought was how many different international cultures are present in any organization. I mean, I have to work with 15 offices, but I mean, our UK office probably has about 30 or 40 different nationalities. Sadly, fewer as a result of a recent change in our relationship with the European Union. And that in itself has caused difficulty on a cultural basis. So luckily we've got a European office in Germany, and that's it. But working with young people, I think there's a difference between the culture and the personality type, and that the people who take responsibility, who want to engage, who want to do more, put something of themselves in, will do things. We have the same email message that Tom refers to. I always find it odd that the people who have that are the people emailing me at 2 in the morning, though. And then I start thinking, well, what time zone are they on in any case? So it's really difficult. The final thing I'd say on this is, way back when we shifted from what I call a traditional publisher, going to the Frankfurt Book Fair and sending out mail shots and working through book agents and things, to turning into a data business with face-to-face relationships, we had to have what I call our cultural revolution. The people who were great at promotion, at direct marketing, managing agents, were not the people who could go and knock on doors or pick up phones and make business appointments. And that is a different personality type. I don't think it's necessarily a different cultural type. And yes, I completely agree that it's the company that has to set the tone. And I think that is the differentiator between successful companies and companies which may be not so successful. If you can buy a commodity, and there are lots of things, what differentiates the companies? It is the culture, what they do, whether they embrace corporate social responsibility, what they do. We make we donate 1% of our sales to charity, not 1% of our profits, and that resonates. Companies, our clients now, do those sorts of checks on us to see what our policies are on this, and I think all companies have to embrace these things.
Thank you, Trevor. And there's a lovely link actually to the question in the chat, so I'm going to bring it in right here. Julia George asks, given the new choice for people, those who need human interaction and those who can do their job sitting at home, will we start to see a two-tier system, those who communicate and those who are technicians and can do it all very remotely? And what does this mean for recruitment, education, society at large? Is it your sense that we're heading to a two-tier situation? Is that the panelists' general view, or do you think it'll settle down? What's your sense, Tom?
It's not my sense that we're heading to a two-tier system in that sense. I think that we're heading to something quite fluid, and so where is it multi-tier? Is it I think that people will come in and out of work environments, and it's almost less formed. So it's sort of like moving. I did physics at university, and you have the idea of phase transitions where you move from solid to liquid and liquid to gas, and I think in a sense we're moving from solid to liquid. We're moving from one state to another state, and the state that we're moving to is a more fluid state. So some people will work for some time remotely, and then they'll be back in the workforce, and then they'll in the physical space, and then they'll be remote again, and that will just start to become the way that we work. I think what's interesting about the question of new entrants is that some people, if you're an entrepreneur today, if you're a young entrepreneur today and you're creating your business for the very first time, I'm not sure that one of the things high on your agenda will be, where is our office going to be? That, I think that becomes something that's introduced possibly later if you need it. And whereas for us, for me, when I've started my businesses in the past, one of the first questions is, right, so where's the head office going to be? I'm going to put it somewhere near where I live so I can walk to work. That's one of the things that we brainstorm right from the start. I think a young person today, that would be like them starting their business and me coming along and saying, where's your horse? And they say, what? What do you mean? Where's my, why do I need a horse? You know, it's just sort of, why do I need this office somewhere? You know, if I find I need one later on, I'll create it. So I think that will come, but it is a different mindset.
That's a great insight. And I'm going to turn to Shivan next, because I'm really interested in that thought around what the new environment might be. And then also we've got people like Google who've been very clear that their business model and their culture is built on innovation through collaboration, and everybody's back worldwide, no discussion, as I understand it. So Shivan, what's your sense of how it plays out and what it means for the city environment?
Thanks. So I think we're having sort of two-dimensional view of it, to say, are we creating tiers of people based on their personality types and behavior as to whether they'll thrive or not, or how they will thrive will be different. I think we've also got to throw into that sort of human aspect, that actually we don't like change, right? Actually, everyone talks about, yes, change is always good, but actually deep down, change is always difficult. And I think one of the things that you know, when we've had change thrust upon us in the way we have, the way people have reacted to it has been very, very varied. And I don't think, you know, you could say 2 tiers or 3 tiers or 4 tiers. I think we're talking, you know, a lot more than that. And I think that's the matrix we've got to start to understand, that this is not a two-dimensional piece, that there are, you know, there's a whole bunch of other human behaviors that actually perhaps transcend corporate culture to some, you know, to a large extent. And we've got to actually start to look at, as I said when I spoke about the most vulnerable people out there, the ones who really cannot change or cannot adapt and need help and need that support. And it's you know, when you're employing sort of the sort of hundreds or thousands of people that people like Trevor's company do, that's the real risk. Is, yeah, your alphas will get on with it, and your technicals will get on with it, but there'll be that sliver, and that's where I think we really need to sort of focus a lot of corporate energies to say, no, everyone's got to be on this journey together. And what does that normal look like, you know?
Those are great insights. Thank you, Shivan. And they link to 2 questions that have come in that I'm going to group together, if that's all right for the panel. The first is from Patrick, who says, how do we even ensure that everyone understands and starts to buy into corporate culture? And then from Anne Summers saying, changing the culture is not without huge risks and takes so long, as so many of you have touched on there. So how do you make plans, and how do you approach the process and the planning of what to build into culture? And then I think Shivan's added another dimension, which is some of the cultural needs of the past, and Tom touched on this very heavily, are no longer quite so relevant. So how do we do that? How do we bring people on the journey? How do we plan? How do we make that intervention? Tom, is it something you've already put a lot of work into?
We have put a lot of work into it, and we'll continue to do so. We started with very open conversations about it. So what we didn't do is come along to the team and say, right, here's your new culture. We said, what are the aspects of our existing culture that we want to keep in the new normal, and what really matters to you as a team? And they, you know, we had an away day to do this, and they brainstormed a huge number of things actually that we then sort of grouped into these different areas. And now I had some experience of working on corporate cultures, as had others, but I think a company, if it doesn't necessarily have that capability internally, it needs to be willing to invest in expertise from outside, because as a company you can't be expert at everything, and there are people who do this for a living, and I think organizations need to be very, very open to that. I think the point that's been made about how the culture works for different individuals, introverts, extroverts, and so forth, is hugely important as well, because I'm quite introvert, and therefore sitting behind a screen in a room on my own is not a chore. I could do it all day, but I actually need to need to come out and engage with people. It's healthy for me. It's important to me, even though I might not think it is. And I think organizations thinking carefully, I've seen a question about it somewhere, organizations thinking carefully about the mix of personalities they've got and how that might work with their culture is really important as well. So it's quite a complex thing to look at.
Brilliant, and thank you. I'm going to link this to a couple of questions and thoughts that have come in. Julia George asked, how important is it for organizations to understand the personality profile mix of its workforce? And I think you've touched on just how important it is. How, I think, is a lot more challenging, and then what do you do with it? I think you've touched on the importance of empathy there, but another question then is what are the KPIs that you would put around culture? And I'm going to come and ask for each of the panelists to suggest one KPI that they think would be a really useful cultural KPI that may not be in the board's current KPI deck. And then I think another question that's come in or comment is, do you feel there's an opportunity for more women to be leaders in the new normal culture? To which I'm sure the hope is yes, but interested in people's views. So I'm going to move around the panel, firstly on that KPI question of what would be the one KPI that you would add to a board deck around culture? And then if you want to touch on the question about, do you think there's going to be more female leadership, yes or no? Go on, Trevor, you look ready to go.
I was just thinking back a couple of years. I went on a walking trip through a very small Asian country called Bhutan, where they measure their success by a happiness index, gross national happiness. And I would have thrown this into my opening statement, but after half an hour, you rightly pulled the rug from under me. I was thinking of the Maslowian hierarchy of needs, and how I think that applies equally to organizations and corporations. You move at the moment. Last year we were in safety and making sure we survived, and then we go through the more rewarding things, the self-actualization. When I talk about this at Euromonitor, one of my things is how many, my KPI would be probably an ambition that I would hope that our future replacement of a fusty old person like myself, who I do enjoy happiness, would be someone who's working for our company, who may have joined the company very recently. I mentor lots of people in my company and externally, and it's always a thing of sharing experiences rather than, as any good mentor should do, hopefully doing it. And people have said that to me, that there is a culture in a company and a responsibility. It isn't bottom up, it has to be top down and bottom up, and a mixture in the middle. So, so my KPI will be that my successor after next will be someone who has only recently joined the company and will come from a probably extremely diverse background.
Wow, that's a challenge, and sounds like a very good one. Tom, what would be your metric that you'd add in?
Gosh, I think for us, and we've started to do this, is to ask the staff to rank the dimensions. So out of our 4 pillars of responsibility, openness, flexibility, and learning, to tell us which one we are doing the best at and which one we could be doing more at. And so, for example, at the moment, what they say to us is we are doing best at flexibility and we could be doing more at learning, and we listen to that carefully. And when we have new people join the company, I sit down with them and explain the culture. That's my job. I don't tell them about the business plan and this and the other. Other folk do that, but I tell them about the culture. And I say to them, I'm going to come back to you in 2 or 3 months' time, and you need to tell me whether we're really living that culture, because it's so easy to just say, yeah, what we do is responsibility, openness, flexibility, and then everyone gets on with their job kind of thing and forgets it. But so in a sense, my KPI, my performance indicator to myself is when I go back to members of staff and say, rank these pillars for me in genuinely as a company, which of those are we doing really well on and which of those could we do more on? That tells me whether we're really embedding the culture into the organization and living it. But it is a big challenge. It's a huge challenge.
Thank you, Tom. Shivan, what would you add?
So I think there's a really great opportunity here to actually look at how the different there's an opportunity here to look at the types of people that bring value to the companies. And I think there could be an opportunity to reframe how that's assessed. And it's not necessarily on the sort of perhaps old corporate metrics. I think that's one of what could be part of the new normal, and the new corporate metrics could be around, how we bring diversity of thought to the table. And there's already been data produced that shows that boards that have diverse people on them do actually perform better as boards, and the companies perform better than those that don't. So that from a shareholder perspective, you've got to sit there and go, well, do I want a room full of people that look exactly the same way, that think exactly the same way, or do I want to bring diversity of thought to the table, and how do I achieve that? And that's where I think there's an opportunity within this lockdown reframing to actually perhaps find some opportunities. And we're doing that in the city, within our own structures. We're starting to look at how we are on panels. So for example, on city panels, there's a recommendation that if there's not a female presence, or if there's not a sort of an ethnic background presence, or some sort of metric there, then we have to question why we're on that panel. And the city's started to look at that, and I think a lot of corporations are as well, not necessarily to tick a box, but actually because you're bringing different thought processes and you're bringing different dimensions in that have value. So you're looking at it from a value perspective, not a tick in the box perspective. And I think that is where real cultural change happens.
And I'm going to add my own, if that's all right, which builds on exactly what you're saying. Is I think, as well as measuring that diversity, the question that I'd love to hear is what percentage of all of those people would say this is a place that I belong? And the reason I say that is there's been some great work in sports science recently around top performing teams. And top performing teams are where people feel that they genuinely belong, where people around them have got their backs, where they can take risks, that they can stretch and go for things that might not necessarily work, but if they do, have great outcomes. And that, to me, I think is a really good indicator that you've built all of those cultural pieces, because I think inherent are actually the 4 things that Tom talked about. I think for people to belong, there is a sense of responsibility, there is a sense of openness, there is flexibility, and there is learning, because for so many people, those are core attributes. So that would be mine. I'm going to get a quick yes, no on the question of, do we think the new normal is going to be a better environment for women to succeed? So I'm only going to take yes or no. Trevor, yes or no?
Yes.
Yes. Tom?
Yes, absolutely.
Shivan?
No.
No. Oh, there we go.
If you want to give me 30 seconds, I'll qualify it as well.
Yes, we'd love to hear. Yes.
I think just, when I look at how my family's adapted to lockdown, it was we changed our roles. We were like a 1950s family for a while, you know. And I think there's a real risk that we're going to leave women behind, because we're going to have to adapt to that that's the way we're going to have to work for a while. And I think there's a real risk we leave that percentage of women behind.
Thank you.
Surely that's how the hybrid working comes in.
Well, let's see. Okay, I won't sort of be that qualified.
Oh, we've lost Shivan at that point. But, I'm interested in this kind of sense of haves and have-nots through lockdown, because there's a couple of questions about enticing younger workers back into the office. And actually, I think for a lot of people, the experience is actually it's middle and senior management who live in the leafy suburbs, bought a dog during lockdown, don't really fancy coming back in, who are actually harder to entice back. So I'm really interested in what would be the top 1, 2 or 3 things that each panelist would recommend or has seen work in terms of things that draw people back. And I know Trevor touched on whether neck massages do or don't work, but what would be the things that you think are going to be important? Free food and fun, says Jill in the chat. So there's an early start. Shivan, what do you think has worked from what you've seen?
It's interesting, isn't it? And I think what we talked about, creating that 24/7 economy and that cultural side, actually is a big draw. It's a huge draw. And actually, as a corporation, trying to expand that cafe culture has been hugely successful over the summer months. And so I think it's not necessarily an individual company having to necessarily do something. I mean, I think I'd quite like to work for where Tom's son works, to be honest with you. But but I think it's that collectiveness that says, you know what, you come together for a reason, you congregate for a reason. That reason will be different for every company, but you're giving them the platform in which to come together. And I saw one of the other questions said, you know, do you think the city is just going to become multi-location? I don't think it will. I think people do want to get together in centres and form centres of excellence. And the financial services sector in the UK does congregate in a specific location, because it brings that skill, that experience, that sort of focus in one place.
So affiliation and the benefits of it. Tom, what would be the things that you think can work in terms of getting people back?
I think that it points to a new role in companies. The role, somebody who is responsible for making micro events or happen that bring larger or smaller bits of the team back together. You don't sort of leave it to chance. You don't just think, well, the office is there, hopefully people will come in. You don't kind of order it by saying, right, you lot need to be in on Tuesday, you lot need to be in on Thursday. But you have people in the team, either explicitly or just because they're those sorts of people, who almost delight in creating micro events that cause people to say, oh, I hear that this is happening on such and such a day. You know, this speaker is going to be in the office in person on this day. You know, this we've got a lot of freelance musicians who are out of work and so forth. You could imagine, you know, paying a cellist to come in and just play for half an hour one lunchtime. Well, people will come in. They just come in because that was happening on that day. So I think a series of interesting micro events that could be work related, could be socially related, are in your office environment, will draw people back in.
Brilliant. Trevor?
I'd separate it into the tactical and the strategic. The tactical things, we've been doing neck massages for probably most of my life at Euromonitor, but but all of those things, they touch different people in different ways, whether it's the Italian barista that we hired during lockdown, to going down the slide that I invented between 2 office floors. All that's great, and yes, it might, but I don't think that's what's ultimately the thing. The strategic things are the company culture, and I think the senior members of the company engaging, having conversations, not being directive, giving people opportunities, setting up the micro teams if that's necessary, or letting them set up their own micro teams and then empowering them to do things. So those are the important things. It does sound a bit hippie-ish, but I think it's all of the above.
And I'm going to link back to the theme of responsibility. A number of people in the chat are talking about high performance sports teams. And I think it's fair to say that in all of those sports teams, there are absolutely kind of rules of engagement. You know, the hockey team practice starts at 9 and you're on the pitch in the right kit to start at 9. Emma Raducanu is mentioned, and likewise, I'm sure that you know, her practice partner is on the court at the right time to do that. So I think there's some really interesting pieces around the responsibility and what that means in terms of high performance teams. And Charles jokingly kind of says threat of the sack, which I think is the stick side of it. And it'd be remiss to say that there aren't different global approaches, it's fair to say. Yeah? So almost all of American universities seem to have gone to a default of double vaxxed and back full-time face-to-face, otherwise no longer a member of staff or faculty in a month time. And so I think that's interesting for us to note and reflect on how that how the different cultural pieces, which I loop back to that theme that we overlaid, personality and national culture and work culture and so on, all of these things kind of play into the kaleidoscope. I'm going to move us on to probably our last couple of questions, which I'm going to group together. There's Keith Arundale touched on the private equity world and embracing increased efficiency, reduced travel and carbon footprint, a lot more deals being done, and 2021 being a record year. So a hybrid approach going to be the way forward in the new normal, which I think we've absolutely said we all agree with. A few people said, but what specifically, you know, if I'm going to go out there and entrepreneurially go for something, what would be your sense of sectors that are absolutely ripe for disruption as a consequence of what's evolving? So I'm going to ask the panel, what's your sense of the sectors that you think this really changes the game for? Tom, can I come to you? I'm sure it's an area that you've spent a lot of time thinking about.
Well, I mean, I suppose I'm working in a sector at the moment. I mean, because I live in the technology sector, we do this already. So it's difficult. I tend not to be looking outside of that sector and looking for areas that can be disrupted outside of the technology sector, because I live in there already. So I'm not sure I have huge insights to offer, but I'm interested. I know that Trevor is the ultimate disruptor, so I'm really interested to hear his thoughts on this.
Trevor looks like he's thinking. Do you have a couple of thoughts top of mind?
Wow. I was just thinking, you know, I mentioned newspapers and recorded music, the music industry. The disruption that's happened in hospitality is huge, and I'm really interested how that's going to play out, not just because of COVID, but because of the Brexit situation. But young people. So I mean, my eldest son, who is a nurse, he gave me a book about 2 years ago called Shit Jobs, and I mean the best exposition. I'm not actually answering the question, but hospitality has to sort this out, and whether it's paying more, making them respected jobs. You know, if you travel around Europe, people are happy to work in restaurants and things like that. Now, they may be more family orientated, whatever, but it is a real challenge for our hospitality industry to find the right people to do it. And if that means we've all got to pay more for our food and our drink, then we should do that. So that's where I see a lot happening on the consumer side. In our business, we're disrupting the whole time. As Tom said, technology is disruptive. Artificial intelligence is interesting. It hasn't happened yet. Big data, machine learning. Some of my colleagues feel that this may disenfranchise them, the more traditional ones, but I say not, because you always need to add value to large amounts of data. You know, it's the why, not the what.
Lovely. I'm going to wrap us up with a very, very final question, which is, do you think there'll be an office Christmas party this year? So yes or no, will there be office Christmas parties? Trevor, yes or no?
Absolutely, all over. Yeah, many.
Great. Tom?
Yes, it's going to be an amazing year for Christmas parties.
Shivan?
Yes, there's a third yes. You've got 3 yeses.
Excellent, and hopefully in the City of London. We haven't managed to get to everybody's question. They just flooded in, and it's been a testament, I think, to our amazing panelists. It's a very broad topic and one I know that everybody's wrestling with, but I'm sure you'll all join me in a massive thank you to the panelists. I do also need to say a few extra thank yous. Lucy McCord was hidden away making all of the technology work this evening, and there's a lot of work that goes on behind it. And the Tri-Livery group of Amaid, Carol, Anne and Julia pulled all of this together, and a lot of work goes into all of that. So thank you to all those people who made tonight possible. But most of all, thank you to all of you for attending and for asking such great questions. And I'm sure that many of these conversations will be going on when we are able to get together, hopefully in the very near future, for a few drinks and actually talk over a glass of something. And with that, I'd like to hand over to Trevor Brignall, who's the Senior Warden of the Marketors, to wrap up the evening.
Thank you very much, Jenny. And our thanks to you as well. Historically, the stationers and their members were publishers, particularly newspaper print. You'll all remember the famous quote, "Today's headlines will wrap tomorrow's fish and chips." But the news that Zoom was no longer the new black perhaps has been proved wrong by over 130 people attending tonight's event. Perhaps the key has been the quality of speakers and also the topic that's been debated. In terms of culture, as Shavra mentioned, the city will be retaining its position as a global cultural centre, and we look forward to it being a 7-day, 24/7 arts and entertainment centre, not only for workers and residents, but the hundreds of thousands of people who visit it every year. Perhaps one of the cultural successes of the city actually has been its diverse workforce. Over 40% of the workforce in the city actually were never born here and come from outside the UK. So hopefully that will bring some insights to what Tom and Trevor mentioned earlier about culture. We're already looking at an event for next year, which, as the Master Stationer has said, hopefully will be in person and, more importantly, at the brand new shiny Stationers Hall. It's my delight to offer the final thank you to everybody and wish you all a very safe journey, even though you're only traveling from one room in your house to another. Thank you and good night.